Through Star Wars Acolyte's ups and downs, we got a pretty interesting look at the expansion of Star Wars lore all throughout the galaxy. But this one piece gives more questions than answers. Welcome to Star Wars Uplink. So, the big reveal. 12 minutes into the Acolyte final episode, the series finale, we got a big reveal. And it's that Star Wars has officially made Darth Plagueis canon. Previously, I mean canon in the sense that we see him.
Right.
Because obviously we have the whole of like, have you ever heard the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise?
He's canon in lore, at least.
Yes. He's mentioned, but now we actually see him. And
Yes.
we see the focus of him and the story. And I've seen a lot of people wondering because in Legends, his age... It is ambiguous. Mm-hmm. It is not explicit like, oh yes, Darth Plagueis the Wise was born 2000 BBY or whatever. He says in human years, I would be over 100 years old or so.
Sure.
So people did the math. He'd be about 15 BBY or whatever. But that, again, that's just estimating.
Yeah.
Like he could be 190. He could be these things. Like his whole focus as a character is extending his life.
Right.
And his focus is on studying the Force to extend his life. Mm-hmm. And not just the Force, other creatures as well.
Yeah, so it could be very feasible for him to be here.
Oh, yes.
At this time frame.
Especially because Palpatine didn't say, did you ever hear of Darth Plagueis the Wise who was born 100 BBY or whatever?
Yeah. There's definitely a lot of like loose ground to just kind of put him in sometime before these events sort of things,
So there's a couple things here. I like the introduction of Plagueis being active around this time.
Yeah.
And also it being clearly an amount of time after he has already killed his master, as we assume.
Yeah.
Because we don't also see Tenebrow lurking in the background. Maybe we're wrong to assume that is the case. I think Plagueis is very interesting. Both Tenebrow and Plagueis are very interesting because... Plagueis being part of the banking clan, being very much an influence on that planet and in that life, using his wealth and influence across the galaxy to expand his strength in the galaxy, I think is really fascinating. Tenebrow much more on the scientific side, I think is what his main focus was of study. And then Tenebrow taking that and like utilizing his strengths and his connections to go even deeper. Very much different from the Sith of old, where they would be very, very visual and explicit in the galaxy of their strength.
These characters are really fascinating, at least from what we know of them, especially because of their races. Mm-hmm. Like, they have all these extra, like, abilities /
Yeah, I think Plagueis has, like, a second heart or something like that. He's got extra organs.
Yeah, and, like, Tenenbaum had, like, these really heightened senses and stuff like that just because of their species.
Yeah.
Or their alien race.
Yeah. Species, I think, would be more accurate, I guess.
Yeah, I don't really know how to categorize that. But, I mean, obviously in a 3-second clip, we're not going to know what exactly they're trying to say about all of that. But it is really exciting to see an alien, like an alien Sith. That's so cool. I don't know. It's just cool.
And I think it opens up a lot for Star Wars lore. I tweeted this, that Star Wars Acolyte, while it struggles with the actual storytelling piece and it struggles deeply, it is deeply flawed in the story it wants to tell, it is incredibly good at deepening the lore of Star Wars. It understands lore and its impact in Star Wars very well.
Yeah.
It just struggles on the story it wants to tell. Sure. And that's, like, honestly, like, switching into kind of our thoughts and opinions on this episode, I think that's the biggest criticism I have for Plagueis in this. I think they did a good job with, like, portraying him. He looks very good.
Yeah.
It didn't look cringy or anything.
No,
like, it was kind of weird that he was kind of, like, lurking in the shadows and, like, slunking in the shadows.
Yeah.
I don't know if it works for his character. I just don't think he should be in this show.
Right. Like, because you're not going to be able to explain anything about this character, why do we need to see him other than...
It's not good for this story.
Right. Yeah. It's like, if this isn't helping anything, this is kind of something that you would probably see at like the end of a season.
It'd be an end credit scene kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Like, why are we putting this in the middle of this episode? Anyway, so yeah, a strange moment for sure that didn't progress the story when it's really the story we need to be focusing on.
Yeah, the core story that Star Wars The Acolyte is trying to tell is about Jedi corruption and the eventual falling of the Jedi Order.
Right.
Like, that's ultimately what we're seeing here. While it was touted as Kill Bill meets Frozen, a Sith-led Star Wars story, murder mystery, it ended up not being any of those things, and instead became a story of warning for the Jedi, really. And it truly showcases of how good emotions, the emotion of love that Soul had, and the emotion of protection that Soul wanted to have towards Osha and May, can lead to terrible things.
Yeah.
That is the core of what this story wanted to tell. And we can all argue on whether or not this is the story that they should have told, or if it should have been this way or that way. But if we're looking at the story that we got, the story that we got is that.
Yep.
It is a story of good emotions that end up going bad.
Yeah.
And also the repercussions of those actions. And then they tacked on a bunch of things.
Sure.
And that's where things really start to crumble.
Yeah, Soul definitely had this really good story, and that was kind of the whole point of it. Obviously, we're following Osha and May as well. How it was sold to us was definitely not what we got.
And even what we got wasn't what we were supposed to get, like from what the original story set up. Because then we have the whole thing, like the idea that it makes sense for Plagueis to be here because of these things that are happening. May and Osha weren't figured out to be such a big deal until much later on with these characters.
Right.
So there's no real purpose for that.
I almost wonder if they're setting it up, if they brought Plagueis in because he's going to really want to study these girls.
Oh, I think that's the ultimate case.
Like, that seems like something because they've been created through really, really powerful force thing.
I don't think the characters know yet, because if Plagueis had tasked the stranger Kamir to do this,
right, he would have
once
had to
he
try to
found
get them
out
both.
He'd have to keep them both.
Right.
He needed Osha and May, and now May is part of the Jedi Council, and her brain's wiped.
Yeah.
So even that story, like, there's so many things here where they're trying to do too many things at once. It's not working very well. There are too many threads that they're trying to weave that ultimately I don't think they succeed at many of them. Great performances, great choreography. There's incredible moments. There's great moments of heart, and you can see there was intentions to make a great story.
Oh, yeah.
It just failed at the actual story piece and focused more on the lore side of things.
Yeah, they tried to make like each individual episode interesting to the big heavy nerds out there. But yeah, I would agree. They didn't quite punch it with the story and keeping it nice and tight and
yeah.
Yeah.
Because if you look at this, like House of the Dragon on HBO is a similar length of episodes and also a similar budget. If you look at how intriguing that story is versus The Acolyte, you see something where House of Dragon, yes, it's Game of Thrones related.
Sure.
But they aren't being like, oh yes, this person here is related to this, and this thing happens because of this, and also this thing happens because of this. Like, they aren't going into it with the intentions of explaining all the history of the Game of Thrones. They're going into it with the intentions of, let's tell a story set in the same universe.
Right.
That may have similar characters or may have the ancestors of characters that we're familiar with, but we're not going to make the story about that.
Right.
We're going to make the story about this other thing.
Yeah, we have a thing to say, and that's not related to Game of Thrones. Like, they completely just let Game of Thrones be its thing, and then they make their own story. Like, that's what we need to see more in Star Wars.
Yes. So it's this really, I described it as like a waste of potential. And this is what happens when you focus on lore over story. Story is what people connect with. It's why people enjoy these things. Lore is just the icing on top. And when you make a cake of just pure icing and then a layer of like a thin layer of cake on top of that icing, doesn't hold. It doesn't stand up. It kind of crumbles and smushes and all this stuff. So I also described it as like a candle shop.
Yeah.
Each of the threads that they're playing with, the Plagueis the stranger, the romance, the hints, the Jedi, the acolytes, all of these various things on their own, I think smell really good. They're nice. Mm-hmm. But then you go into a candle shop and you have 20 to 30 different smells that are just vying for your attention, and it's going to give you a headache.
Right.
And I think the Acolyte is the perfect example of this, of too many good things.
Yeah.
And not a good editor. Like someone needed to be in that story room.
Be like, nope, this doesn't need to be here.
Yeah, let's cut this. And a lot of people are like, you can't criticize this yet because it's only 3 seconds and the whole story's not done. This season is done.
Yeah.
This is the Acolyte.
Yeah. This was supposed to be a complete story, really.
This is supposed to be a complete story. By Leslie Headland's own words, this is supposed to be a complete thread. Mm-hmm. And if a second season happens, she said there's supposed to be entirely new threads that are supposed to be followed.
Really?
But that is not going to be the case. We're also not promised. The last time something was hinted at the end of an episode or a movie was Solo, a Star Wars story in 2018. Oof. And that has never been continued on the screen. Oof. It has only been continued in comics. So you can't even say, oh, we'll just have to wait for the next one. The next season is not promised. So I think there's just a lot to this show that makes me sad, because I do want another season.
Yeah.
Because it seems like...
It really feels like they're starting to get somewhere.
It seems like season 2, if it ever happens, is going to be what they wanted season 1 to be.
Yeah.
But let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Check out our podcast, and may the Force be with you.